Okay, is it on? Is it on? I think so. Hi, I'm Rebecca from conquerbooks.com, and today we're talking about The Wanderers, what happened in June. So The Wanderers was one of my favorite books from 2019, the year that it was published. It even made its way into my Christmas card, where I usually talk about my favorite book of the year. And so I normally wouldn't read something this soon again, even if I really enjoyed it like I did with The Wanderers, but you cannot ignore the parallels between what happened in The Wanderers and what's happening now in 2020. And so I just felt compelled to read it again just to take my mind off things. I don't know. We are going to talk about the first portion of the book. It runs chronologically, so I read all of the chapters that took place in June. And I always kind of like doing that with books. There's a sense of, the flavor in the air and the seasons and the weather and kind of what you're thinking about, that it's neat when your real life lines up with what's happening in the book. And so I'm going to be reading this again throughout 2020, but month by month in real time along with the book. There are spoilers in this video. If you're looking for a spoiler-free review of Wanderers by Chuck Wendig, check out the video Nicole and I did last year. I will link it down below. And we have some acting and a very good review. So do check it out if you're looking for that. If you're okay with spoilers, either because you've already read it and you're looking for somebody to discuss this book with, or you don't anticipate reading it, or perhaps you are just fine with some spoilers, or you want to get a taste of what the book is really like before you jump into it, that's totally fine. Thank you for being here. So, what happened in June? The book opens with this sister, Shanna and Nessie, and Shanna knows that her sister Nessie is a little bit different. She is smart, she is amazing. Shanna feels like she can't do anything right except her interest in photography. Nessie is the one that her father is really pushing to go to college. She does all of these experiments in her room. But one day she just walks away, and Shanna's looking through the house for Nessie, and she finds her wandering down the road outside, and it seems as if Nessie is sleepwalking. She won't respond to anything. Shanna doesn't know what to do. She walks with her for some distance, and then she's like, I'm gonna go get my dad because I can't wake her up. I can't stop her. She's having this kind of physical reaction when I try to restrain her, so I'll go get my dad. Well, he doesn't know what to do either, so they get a paramedic. Well, the paramedic doesn't know what to do either, so they get the police. Well, the police don't know what to do either. And it seems as if there must be some sort of sickness or disease. What else could be happening to make this young person just leave her house sleepwalking? And then other people start showing up, other walkers, other wanderers, other sleepwalkers, and they just fall in line behind Nessie, and they can't do anything about it. Other family members start to gather as they seek to shepherd their member of the flock, because it's clear that they're going somewhere, and it's clear that nobody can interrupt their progress, their pilgrimage. And so the family members can just watch and wonder what's going on and just hope to be there if they wake up, or to try and keep them safe. So that's one point of view, one story that's going on. Another, there's a lot in this, which I love books that have multiple point of views. I think it makes for a more interesting cast of characters. It really fleshes out the world situation and all of the world building that the author did. So for me, that's very fun. But one of the other main point of views is Benji. And Benji is a disgraced former member of the CDC. And he was kicked out of the CDC because he falsified information, hoping to close down a farm. And it was his thought that this farm was keeping their animals in conditions that would lead to a very serious disease. And so he kind of waited out. He felt like, I just have to see something happen. Nothing had happened yet, but he couldn't see a future where something didn't happen, where there wasn't some sort of outbreak stemming from this farm. So he falsified data. The CDC kicked him out. He really hurt the CDC's credibility. And he just tries to start over until one day a woman named Sadie shows up, and she introduces him to Black Swan. Okay, So if you didn't think Sleepwalkers was sci-fi fantasy enough, Black Swan is an AI, and Black Swan wants Benji. And he doesn't really realize what for, but Black Swan has collected information and decided that Benji should go where these sleepwalkers are. So listen to this description from Chuck Wendig about Black Swan. They called it Black Swan after Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Black Swan theory, which suggested that some events were utterly unpredictable. Only after the events happened did we rationalize their occurrence as something we should have expected. Further, such unexpected events disproportionately affected the outcome of history, far greater than those events we were able to predict or expect. Down at the bottom, Bennett's Voyager saw this as a challenge and named its machine Black Swan ironically. The machine intelligence gathered and swept large swaths of data looking for improbabilities or even theoretical impossibilities and could thus draw conclusions, predictions from them. The events of 9/11, of course, were labeled a black swan. And yet, looking back, signs did exist that such an attack was coming, signs that were routinely ignored by those in power. Black Swan, it was promised, would not ignore such signs. So Benji gets on board. He realizes that there's something interesting going on with Black Swan. It seems like it has some power to identify events in the human world. And so Benji, he's also kind of having this tug of war that, yeah, if there's a pandemic or an outbreak, like that's where his purpose is. He wants to be there, and Black Swan gives him the opportunity to be there in an official capacity. So we have Shanna and Nessie. Nessie's the sleepwalker. We have Benji, the former CDC official who's working with the AI computer Black Swan. We have two more point of views that I want to cover in this video. One is Matthew, who's a preacher, and he is trying his best, and he kind of his point of view comes in a little later. So he's kind of hearing a few things on the news about these sleepwalkers and people are scared, but he is not focused on those worldly things. He is focused on his own flock, his flock at his church. Until a man named Ozark shows up. And Matthew's son has been working for Ozark for some time, I think at a junkyard. And Ozark is this big, tall, big, manly man. And when Ozark speaks, you kind of listen up. Ozark has a lot of power in the area that he lives in, and there's quite a few people who will back him in whatever he decides. And Ozark is really interested in the spiritual implications of the sleepwalkers. If this is end times, if this is political, if this is some sort of conspiracy theory at work. And Matthew kind of brushes it off until suddenly he actually sees the sleepwalkers on TV, and then he gives a fire and brimstone sermon the next day, calling them, I think, pilgrims of the devil, and really getting into it. And that's what Ozark was looking for, some sort of authority to allow him to get engaged in these events. And so Ozark and his men go down to one of the towns that the walkers are passing through, and they stir up some trouble, and their goal is to try and take them out. But pretty exciting scene. You should read it for him yourself. So the fourth point of view I want to talk about is Jerry Garland. And Jerry Garland is kind of like the Walt Disney of the Wanderers, or more specifically, Walt Disney's son, who's not doing as good of a job as his father did. The Garland family has Garland Gardens, these big amusement parks, and Jerry Garland is on this big voyage trying to open up a bunch more of them, and internationally. And it's really the same way that Disney for us is a really quintessential piece of American culture. That's how Garland's is portrayed in the book. So, but Jerry is not a very bright person, not really thinking ahead, not really listening to any voice of reason. And so he is at a press conference, and they are about to announce that they have these, 5 new theme parks coming, and he gives the word, and this mountain behind him blasts because they're breaking ground for the amusement park, and he thought that would be dramatic. However, then a flock of bats come out of the mountain and attack him. And he's humiliated because obviously that video of him goes viral, and he's really embarrassed and he just wants to keep moving forward, but he starts having these symptoms and he starts acting funny and confused and irrational, and nobody can reason with him. And I should mention that this portion of Jerry Garland's story is actually a flashback. It goes back 6 months. And so over these 6 months, he really deteriorates until he dies wandering the wilderness of the Florida Everglades. And when his remains are found, it's basically just fungus sprouting from his body. And you get the sense that this is different than what the sleepwalkers are experiencing, but you don't know very much at this point in the book. You think, how are they connected? Did he get them sick? Did they get him sick? Like, you're trying to kind of piece this together. Are these two separate things that are happening? You know, that's part of the fun of this book, this mystery that's going on regarding the diseases. And of course, that's a huge theme in this book, viruses. I didn't realize it, you know, when I was young and innocent back in 2019, I didn't realize it, but this book was my first introduction to the phrase PPE. And, you know, they have their hazmat suits and they're, you know, going to go perform tests on the walkers. But I did not realize how big that was going to be part of my life. And by the way, I do hope you're wearing a mask. I wear a mask when I have to go to a store to pick something up, or if I'm going in a public place. And so I hope you're taking COVID-19 seriously and wearing a mask and doing what you can to mitigate the spread. Just like COVID-19, this is a book that makes references to zoonotic diseases. And I don't know if I said that. Zoonotic? Like animal-based diseases or diseases that jump from animal species to animal species. And that is really what's happening to Jerry Garland, right? He's attacked by these bats and then he just deteriorates. His body is unequipped to deal with what he's facing. And we still don't know how all of these things connect. But as a speculative fiction, pandemic-themed book, that's part of the appeal of this. The other side of it that's really interesting to me right now is that it really mirrors life in America. And I remember thinking this in 2019 when I read it. I just thought, like, oh my gosh, there's just so many levels in here, you know, environmentally, politically, culturally, that really is reflecting back to us what American life is like. But not just, you know, a mere image. It's different enough that we can see the cracks within it. This is really an analysis on our society and how we're living today and how that's harming people in our communities. One big occurrence is this happens during an election year, and the election is very similar to the 2016 election. And so you have President Hunt, who she's a liberal, there's lots of name calling, she's very stern, she doesn't really connect with the public. And then there's Ed Creel, who is this Republican. Some people, you know, think that he goes too far with his comments and he's kind of rough around the edges. He believes in business over government, freedom, and you just get this really clear sense of Clinton versus Trump. And I think that what's interesting about this, no matter what your political opinion is it really seeks to look at the faults of both parties. Ed Creel in this book really goes on to have a big impact on this population in America that is dealing with fake news, that is looking to do things on their own terms and not what society is dictating. And that's another big thing, fake news. Each of the chapters in Wanders opens up with a diary entry from one of the characters, a tweet, something on Reddit. And it's really neat because it just gives you some extra context. So this one is some of Pastor Matthew's podcast. You just get some extra context of their own voices. A lot of these are fake news, especially at the beginning as people are trying to figure out what is happening. And you can imagine how if we were to experience some sleepwalkers in our country, how things would get distorted very quickly on the internet. Another theme that I thought really came out, especially on the second read through for me, was that Benji, who's this point of view character who's black, has to deal with the police. And the police come into play a couple of times here. There's one former officer who she, really is just trying to get her life back together after being attacked by a criminal, and she kind of goes along with the flock to protect them. There's also this police officer early on who's called in. Remember I referenced when Shannon and Nessie, they get their dad, and then they get the paramedics, and then they get the police. Well, that police officer just kind of like digs in his feet, and he's like, these people should not go any farther. I'll stop them. And he doesn't, and he makes things very, very bad for some of these sleepwalkers. And it really highlights how we call in people to take care of something that they may not necessarily be trained for. Benji has to work with police along the way because the walkers, I keep saying walkers from The Walking Dead, they're really sleepwalkers. They're often called the flock in the book. So the flock keeps going through rural America, staying away from some big towns, but they have to work with the police and the state troopers in every new region and state that they go through. And it's difficult for Benji to feel like he is taken seriously in some of the situations, especially after somebody tried to attack the flock. And I think there's just so many different levels that, really think about the point of view characters and what their different experiences are like that really resonate with what we're experiencing here in 2020. One other thing I wanted to read was a general note about losing faith in the system. So throughout this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we really had the light shined on all the systems that we have in place for our healthcare, for communication, for how our communities are run at a local level. And I think that a lot of us feel dissatisfied, that we just feel like there could be something clearer, better, like we could be more unified during this time. And Benji feels this too, and really thinks about what systems do and how bad systems can just destroy things. So just a little bit of backstory. Benji, oh dear, I took out the wrong, see this little pink piece? It was supposed to help me find the page. Okay, let me get to the correct page. I was like, whoa, that is not what I thought I was going to read about, but okay. Okay, no, here it is. So Benji is kind of reflecting on his falsified data that he released in the name of the CDC to try and stave off this outbreak that he foresaw happening at this farm. So to try and describe what he was feeling in that moment, this is what he says. No, that's not it. I swear, Martin. He shook his head as blood trickled from his lip to his chin and hung there. I kept my faith in you. I kept my faith in God. I didn't lose faith in myself. I just lost faith in the system. The prediction I made that day wasn't just about some super bug or a new flu pandemic. I predicted how the system would fail us right then and there. I'd make my warning. I'd show the data, the real data. And then what? The system would protect itself. It wouldn't protect people. It would protect money and the people who make it. Nothing would change. Nobody's out there making a universal flu vaccine because the money doesn't support it. Nobody's making new antibiotics because, again, no money and cheap pill with short prescription life. And here, the money was epic. It would protect itself. It would protect the system. And in that moment, I wanted to do something about that. So this is a big struggle for Benji that really follows him throughout the whole book. But in rereading this now in 2020, I just felt that kind of hit me. We're looking for comfort and we're looking for guidance with our systems in place. And we really have to take a clear look at them and decide which ones are working for us, the people, and which ones aren't. So The Wanderers really is a timely book. If you haven't read it yet, I do encourage you to. It is a lengthy book. So I'm reading this chapter by chapter. I started with all the chapters that took place in June to read in June, and I'll continue on through. So you don't have to read it all in one sitting. It's also some very clear, engaging writing. There's so many twists and turns, and there's some good humor as well. It's a fun thing to read. So in June, the Sleepwalkers made their way from Pennsylvania to Indiana, and we got the backstory of that second event of Jerry Garland getting attacked by the bats, and then over 6 months really developing some sort of disease and deteriorating. But the tone during this time in the book really makes me think of how I was feeling in March. The disbelief that COVID-19 is actually here and spreading, watching government agencies scramble, trying to figure out what to do, watching our school district try and figure out what the policy is, what we're going to do, and just all of us mentally trying to get a handle on what COVID was without a lot of information. I feel like we've learned a lot since then. The news boom in Wanderers is a slow grow too, just like it was here. When we first heard about it happening in China, it was kind of on the fringe of the news. You heard about it, but there wasn't as much urgency. And in the book, you can see very clearly how it really breaks out and spreads, and then comes to consume the entire nation. So I'm going to do this again in July for the July portion of the book, when, man, things go down in July. Yes, Independence Day. Hopefully you read along. If you don't, tune back in. I'll give you the summary and all the good details. And if you are reading it, let me know in the comments what you think. Nicole and I are still running Conquer Books even during this time. You can check out our blog, conquerbooks.com, where we post short stories by authors, book reviews, musings on science fiction, fantasy, book culture, book lists, all kinds of good things. We're also on Facebook under Conquer Books, and there we're active daily with a neat community of people who enjoy reading some of the science fiction and speculative fiction things that we like. Otherwise, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. It's much appreciated. And see you in July. Bye.